As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Harry, good morning. Thanks for that intro. And again, that was Zach Carlin, a student that I met at Gateway Community College. And I've been using his themes. He's been my theme song person for the last maybe 14, 15 months. But I still like him. I still like, there are other people out here, but I like what Zach and the message. Every time I hear the message on Monday mornings, it kind of inspires me in terms of never giving up, because we go through these life cycles of being up or being down or being depressed or being excited, and it's just good to have that kind of backup in the morning. So good morning, everyone. It'd be really a pleasure this morning. Speaking of schools, and as I say, I met Zach at Gateway. Kevin Staton is here with us this morning. Kevin's a Hillhouse librarian, and he's been in New Haven for a minute, even when he was in his younger years. Left to kind of go on the yard. I guess you guys call it the yard down there at Howard.
Yes, we do.
Spend some time at Howard, and they let you graduate.
Yes, sir.
All right, but you paid the money, so you paid. You got it. You got the receipt.
It went to the right place.
You got the diploma receipt, and spent some time at University of New Haven. And we're going to talk about a variety of things. And in fact, I'm going to let Kevin Staton, Hillhouse at Librarian for the last 2 years.
Yes.
Tell what are some of the topics we're going to cover today.
Today we're going to start off talking about the textbooks and the curriculum. There's been a lot of issues around how things are being taught in schools, and I was a history teacher for a long time before I became a librarian. This is my 23rd year in education, so I've only been a librarian for 2 of those years.
All right.
The next thing is the school-to-prison pipeline, which is also connected to that.
Yes.
And I was fortunate enough to teach elementary for 5 years, middle school for 6 years, and high school for 10. So I can kind of trace you through that whole process. We had Chris Murphy come and visit in March 28th, so I wanted to address that.
Yes.
We got a lot of backlash from, I guess, both sides, the right and the left. So I wanted to address both of those.
Perfect.
And out of that, I wanted to talk about the concepts of a manager versus a mechanic. When we talk about education and the process of fixing things. Yes. And then I'll end with why I became a librarian.
Amen.
Yeah.
And he's already committed and promised, and I've had him sign a blood oath to return and maybe even bring some more students, because you can see he has a lot to say and a lot of information that's, when I use the term current, I mean really current. There's currency, and when I hear the word current these days, my mind goes to currency and what is of value. So what he's going to bring to us this morning is of value today, is of value tomorrow. He's going to bring us information that we can also use to invest in our lifestyle and our actions and behavior. So let's kick off the first point again.
Textbooks and the curriculum. So there's been some controversy, I think most recently, maybe even a week or two ago, Texas high schools were in the news, middle schools actually, because in San Antonio, a teacher did a list, and on the list, the students had to list the positives and negatives of slavery. And so, fortunately, there was a parent who was aware enough to bring this not only to the school's attention, but to the national media's attention that, having my child try to list positives of slavery is inappropriate. And so,
to say the least, yes.
Right. And so a lot of times for parents, you want to address where this comes from. And so I wanted to, as a history teacher, explain so that people can be equipped, in order to monitor this in terms of their child's education. So one of the things that people don't talk about is that U.S. history is normally the first part is taught in middle school.
Okay.
That's why we had this issue around slavery. So U.S. history 1 from, the founding of America and Jamestown, and it normally stops around the Civil War. And so they basically given middle school teachers this responsibility. So if I'm a parent and I look at this in terms of when my child is in the 8th grade, okay, I see you learning about George Washington and the Constitution. Are you learning about slavery? Slavery is one of the major issues around the Constitution.
Yes.
You know, so, you know, then in the 3/5 compromise, all that. So I'm going to ask, well, are you learning about the origins of slavery? Do you know about Jamestown and the tobacco trade initially and how this is going to turn into cotton and all these other, the triangular trade? Is this happening? And if it's not, then what you're having are, you know, people are skipping steps and not covering the material. And that's an issue that you can call schools to the carpet on.
So what happened actually? Was the teacher rebuked? Was the curriculum changed? Did people protest?
I think that in this particular instance, the school system offered an apology, and I think the teacher was reprimanded for having that kind of assignment in the classroom. But it really stems from the textbooks.
Oh.
And what happens is the textbook industry is driven by really Texas. Texas and California, because you do your main book sales.
Okay.
And so this book company.
So the population, because of them having a large population, and the market driven. All right.
Exactly. Okay. So I think it's McGraw-Hill. Yep. And this was back in 2015. So a mom confronted the textbook companies because they were teaching slavery alongside immigration and referring to enslaved Africans as workers. So once again, you have this contradiction. You know, we're arriving in Jamestown in 1609. Yes. And then you have us in, you know, the 1880s, you know, with immigration. Well, one wave of immigration, another one's, you know, in the earlier part of the 18th century. But even so, you're over 200 years off. Yes. And to refer to enslaved Africans as workers is problematic in the least. You know, you can quit a job. Yes. You know, there's a pension. You know, maybe there's a union.
I laugh to keep from crying. You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and Kevin Staton is with us, and Hillhouse librarian for the last 2 years, but he's been involved with educational issues in terms of teaching for it. Did I hear you say almost 2 decades?
Yes, 23 years.
And at your young self? Come on. All right. Great. And again, textbooks we're talking about, Senator Chris Murphy's visit we're going to chat about. Really what this metaphor for the pipeline and how we kind of fill up the population in prisons and how you can possibly even identify the reasons early on, as far back as elementary school, if not even before, and a few other topics. So, but on the textbook, it surprised you. Give me a little emotional sample. It surprised you. It surprised you. It disappointed you. It shocked you. It gave you a sobriety test in terms of your background, and you're again a librarian and the textbooks that you use here in the New Haven school system. When you read about the Texas situation, was it just old news, new news? Did it give you inspiration? Did it stimulate you?
It's old news because this has been problematic for a long time. What people don't look at in terms of this being systemic is what conservatives have done is they've rewritten a lot of the narratives, especially around the Civil War. So, you know, especially these issues around fake news and people actually funding their own scholars. So you're quoting a book that was written by someone who wrote the book just so you can quote it and seem like it's a reference. So I'll give you an example. If you go to the Civil War Museum in Gettysburg, you'll see the leaders of the South. Alexander Stephens was the vice president of the Confederacy. He gave a very famous speech called a Cornerstone speech, where he basically said slavery is the cornerstone of our society, and this is why we're fighting. Yes. And so you're getting people that, like I said, once against these quote unquote scholars will write and say, no, it was more about states' rights and Southern sovereignty.
Yeah, Western expansion.
Yeah, and it's like, no, states' rights to do what? To own slaves. That's the entire basis of wealth. Yes. You know, for your society. So when, you know, these people influence these textbook companies and they rewrite these books, now it looks legitimate. Indeed. Because you have a student that's sitting there and they're reading it and they're doing assignments on it. And this is what happens. You have a teacher that says, okay, based on what we've been reading, let's list some of the pros and cons of slavery.
And that's you really put that into the great context, and so it's not that we're really slamming the teacher's capabilities, but the tools that he or she was given, just that person just following the guidelines or the propaganda as laid out for them.
Right, exactly. There's a very famous book that was made into a movie that for a young reader, it's an elementary school level, like maybe 5th and 6th grade. It's called Because of Winn-Dixie. Very popular book. And the book was about a girl and her dog, and they moved down to the South, and she met this woman, and they had a piece of candy. I remember because I got in trouble when I was studying to be a librarian because we had to give a critique or an analysis of the book, and
Yes.
I ripped the book to shreds because I said it's revisionist history. It's incorrect because there was a scene in the book where they had a piece of candy. It was called a Litzmann's lozenge, and the candy was supposed to make you feel the sadness of the Confederate soldier when he came home to see, his house was burned and everything was destroyed from the Civil War. So I asked a simple question. I said, well, is there a piece of candy that makes you feel like you just picked cotton for 14 hours and then were whipped or raped? Is there a piece of candy for that?
Or lynch, sure.
Right, lynch, yeah. Is there a lynching candy? So they were like, oh, you can't take it that way. It's history, Kevin. And I'm like, no, it's not history. That's the whole point, is that it's jaded history.
Yes. And again, you're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and Kevin Staton is with us. And this is as you were remarking, Kevin, for the last, actually maybe for the whole, it'll be 3 years that I've been at the Tom Ficklin Show this coming August. And at some point, doing the show does sadden me that this, but also inspires me. There's kind of that conflict in my mind. But how do we seek and talk about truth and what truth is, and how it is also seems to be a political football. But it really is something that I guess I'm trying to speak to the young people, and you encounter the young people every day, and we're going to talk about that in a while. It's the challenge. It's a challenge, but that's what education is supposed to be about. That right?
Right.
Education is supposed to be about that.
Right.
So how do we? Let's jump for a second, if we can, to DC. This is kind of off the text, but
right.
As it's a juxtapose what you're talking about in terms of what the Texas situation and how people can kind of take advantage of finding truth in a very nice place in Washington, D.C., which is also online.
What?
So the African-American culture.
Oh, the museum.
Yeah, the museum.
They do an excellent job in terms of it's very interesting because the historical part of the museum, that's usually the most crowded, where they take you from enslaved Africans, all the way up to modern day. I think the first floor is maybe slavery through it's from Africa, colonization, and maybe slavery to the Civil War. Second floor I know goes through like Reconstruction, and the third floor is more like of civil rights. I think there's 4, and then it goes into like more like the modern era. But there's another 2 levels that people don't talk about. And there's a level that just covers sports and the different accomplishments of African Americans in sports. And then there's a level that covers art and culture. And so there's a room, where, you can learn about people like James Brown and Sam Cooke and, and Dinah Washington. And, so it's fascinating, but I think there could have been more done with the kingdoms of Africa.
Okay.
So
okay.
I felt
good
like,
point.
yeah, I felt
good
like
point.
There could have been more time spent on who we were before we became enslaved.
Okay.
And because history books aren't going to
sure.
do that. You really
and
have to do that on your own.
You do have the African Art Museum there in the Smithsonian,
right?
But it's a smaller space.
Right.
But you're right. Now I know that Lonnie Bunch wants to kind of take it on a tour, and he seems to be really open to ideas. You took your daughter down there.
Yes. This was her second time.
Her second time.
Because you can't see it all at once. So the first time I think we got through maybe 2.5 floors, and this time we were able to finish, but we also spent some time on the art and culture floor, which she was really fascinated with. We actually went to the National Art Museum, the art gallery that has the Obama and the Michelle Obama.
Indeed.
They have an exhibit on African Americans in the Revolutionary War era and the Civil War, and how they've been written out of history. It was right in my right down my alley.
And one doesn't hear much about that. See, that's tremendous also.
It was astounding. And so my daughter and I, as we're going through the museum, she's asking me questions about different things. And I mean, how powerful is that?
See, that's key. That's key.
You know,
that's key.
As a parent, especially as a dad.
For parents that might be listening between now and the school ends in June and then getting ready for September, and if there's students going from the 3rd grade, 4th grade, or 5th grade to 6th grade, and appreciate you even commenting on that about some of the transitions from maybe middle school to high school. But what should a parent do? Should they kind of look at the books or can you find out what the curriculum is going to be for next year? What kind of advice do you have the parents who might be listening?
That's exactly what you can do. And that relates to my whole thing about the school to prison pipeline.
Well, before we go that, but
in terms of curriculum, you can ask at any school. You can go in and part of open house night. I've done it. And say, what's your curriculum? What textbooks do you use? Every school should have an actual functional copy of what they're doing for the year. And they can give, and you ask for it. You just ask. Sometimes it's online.
Sure.
And you ask for it so you can look at it. So you can know specifically when certain things are going to be taught. And so you can monitor how they're going to be covered.
See, excellent. So let's go to your second point then.
Oh, okay. The school to prison pipeline.
Now I see you're getting geared up for that one.
Oh yeah.
Are you suggesting that before that became a popular phrase that you sensed it because you started teaching? I heard you say like 1996, 1997.
Yeah, 96.
In that time. So you're saying this has been going on for a while.
They've named it now.
They named it now, but you've noticed the. But you could have given it a name.
Yeah, there's a
reality to it from your standpoint.
There's definitely a reality to it, but it's almost like you have to look at it like a plumber.
Okay.
You know, where
so if there's a leak.
Yeah, and how do you stop? A pipeline? You either turn off the water supply, or you divert it. To a different direction.
So what's maintaining the flow from the population flow from schools to prison?
Right, the source, right, and this is where it becomes this whole thing about 0 to 8, where we're talking about young people getting to the 3rd grade.
Okay,
the 3rd grade is for reading. If they can't read by the 3rd grade level, there are plenty of studies that show that the child may not have success in terms of graduating. Now, for a long time, I think Colin Powell and Hillary Clinton would use this quote. They would say that prisons look at 3rd grade reading scores to decide how to go to real. Yeah. That's not really true. They look at a lot of other factors.
Indeed.
But in terms of using 3rd grade reading scores as a litmus test,
it can be predictive.
Yeah, it plays a major part. But my whole thing with the school to prison pipeline, if we're talking about cutting off the water supply, that starts, we're talking about from 0 to 8.
Okay.
And so that starts from early childhood. And, and I've told people that, there are things your child should know before they start kindergarten.
So let's unpack that a little bit. So if you're a parent and your son or daughter is graduating from kindergarten this year and going in the 1st grade next year, or 1st grade, 2nd grade, there's some scores or some tests or some results that you want to be attentive to even now?
Even before that. If your child is going into kindergarten. Your child should have a functional knowledge of their colors.
Okay.
Your child should know their letters from A to Z. Preferably, your child should be able to count from 1 to 100.
1 to 100.
Yeah,
Harry and I are still working on that. Yeah. So I think we better.
But these are things that you want your child to already have an advanced knowledge of, so they can lay the foundation for them being able to put the letters together, sound the letters out, and eventually be able to read.
So say that again for some parent that might just be tuning in.
Definitely, your child should know their letters. There's so many. There are creative ways to do that. Letters and colors. You don't want to be too dependent on technology.
Okay.
For things like this. This isn't one of those things where you just give them an iPad and you say, this is one of those things, it takes time. You try to tell parents, like, look, I understand popular culture and television and all these things going around with the media, but Olivia Pope isn't going to teach your child their numbers.
Okay.
Lucius and Cookie from Empire aren't going to teach your child how to count from 1 to 100. Ghost from Power, isn't going to.
So flashcards or crayons, or give us some specifics.
Right. Well, I can tell you, one of the first things I did was I bought a mat. I set up my living room almost looked like a daycare.
Okay.
So I bought a mat, and there are these mats, there are these tiles, and each tile was a letter.
Oh.
And I don't want to get free advertising to some store, but
well,
you want me to tell? I got it from, I think it was Lowe's had it.
But from Lowe's, or whether it's, so consult with a quality daycare center. They would have some tips for you.
And you can pull this stuff up online.
Go
You can put
online.
an alphabet mat.
An alphabet mat?
Alphabet mat. You can look it up online.
Okay.
It had the letters, and you could pull the letters out.
Pull them out, so
You
you
could
get,
pop
get the
them out.
get the tactile experience kind of thing,
Exactly.
and sense of achievement for the young person.
Exactly. So I had this entire mat in my living room. So she was crawling
See,
at the time. So she'd crawl around, and after a while, we would start practicing. And I would say, all right, sweetie, crawl over to the A. And she'd crawl over to the A, and then she'd pop it out.
so this is back to the 0 to 8. So so if there's a mother listening that's either going through prenatal care or expecting to give birth today as we speak, or sometime in the future, she can jump on the bandwagon.
Get an alphabet mat. Yeah. And so, she would pop the letters out, and, she'd look at it, and then eventually what we started doing, we started spelling, with the letters, so, I'm reading to her.
Yes.
We're doing, books with basic things like cat and dog and sat. And she would just go, all right, sweetie, spell cat. She'd crawl over, pull up the C, pull up the A, pull up the T.
That's fantastic. And what's certainly literacy is important throughout your life. What happens in your mind, just if it can be no more than your hypothesis? I'm not asking you for an evidence-based suggestion, but what happens what do the theorists say about why, if a person is not really cognitively competent in terms of their vocabulary, amount of words that they know and how they use the words, what happens about why they might be trend to say, I'll be kind of facetious here, rather than killing themselves, killing others, or how does that impact your actual behavior?
The language that goes on in your house, and in terms of literacy, what images, is your child seeing? My television, I laugh because there's a big block of television that I never watched.
Okay.
Because it was always on the Sprout channel.
But are you saying that media can cause a person to go to prison, to be blunt? What your child is taking it. I'll give you a prime example. Okay.
I knew some folks that had something very inappropriate on television, and they were saying that, the children aren't seeing that, they're just playing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna watch what I want, and the kids are all around. And if you don't think those kids are perceptive enough to know somebody's getting shot on television, or something's being blown up, or it can warp your reality.
And so therefore a person might want to participate or reenact those things you're saying?
Well, that's one of the dangers, but really it's this whole thing of, you see this with the video games.
Okay.
You constantly have to go through this thing where, there's the real world and there's the world of the video games.
Okay.
And, we have this issue with, adults.
So lastly, to close the loop, how does the vocabulary intake and the vocabulary menu and the quality and quantity of your cognitive framework, is that a defense mechanism to being led down the evil path of incarceration? I'm trying to kind of still close the loop.
I get what you're saying. If you have a child that's, in terms of building blocks, if you have a child that comes into school and they have set knowledge that they arrive to school with, it puts them in a position where now they can move along and they understand the material, and you don't have to. You can fight things like improper labeling of your child, things that set things in motion,
Okay.
that are going to be problematic for you as a parent. So, you know, if your child can't do the work, then your child has a tendency sometimes, especially we deal with this with children of color, they'll get separated.
Okay.
And what I've said all the time is that you have to know the difference between can't and won't. So there are things that your child can't do, and there are things that your child won't do. So for me, when you have a student who's 17 years old and he's getting like a second grade worksheet because of his behavior, you're basically preparing him for the penitentiary.
And you're saying, but why? What causes that person to still take an action that kind of comes under the purview of police?
Okay, you're talking about all the way down the road. You're talking about from third grade.
I'm trying to. We hear this thing from school to prison pipeline so often, and I'm trying to be somewhat argumentative with you that why is it? Is there a substance to it? Why is it really a reality? Why does literacy in particular enable, or the amount or lack of, cause a person to take actions? I mean, like the person could just become homeless, or the person could just kill themselves, or the person could just I won't say take drugs, but do other behaviors that won't cause him or her to be incarcerated.
Okay.
And I'm just curious what your hypothesis is there.
Okay. And I'll just deal with in terms of the concept of school, and you know, dealing with things like dropout rates. And whatnot.
Indeed. So all right.
Yep. So
or maybe disruption in the school in the class, and be victimized, or getting their record early in life.
Yeah. If the foundation is there, then you have a situation where we have students at Hillhouse. Some of the kids come from very adverse home situations, but they're some of the brightest, most intelligent kids I've met, because there's some foundation there that they're able to remain consistent in terms of their academics. So it becomes this thing where they see education as a viable way out.
Okay.
And if the child doesn't have at a young age, the proper skills, and it starts to snowball, and it just gets worse and worse, it just gets compounded and compounded.
Yes.
Then you don't really view education. You don't view school as relevant, and you don't view education as a viable
or even other people's lives, Other
people's lives, because you don't have any options.
Okay.
You know, you don't view yourself as having options. So if you don't value yourself, I'm certainly not going to value other people. So
in the general risk-taking behavior, one might engage in risk in coming under the purview of the legal surveillance team. Again, you're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and Kevin Staton is with us. Kevin's been at two plus years at Librarian at Hillhouse High School, but over 2 decades of teaching in the school system, and a graduate of Howard University. Let me throw that out, right? Yeah. And he's an active contributor. Well, what's next on our list?
The Chris Murphy visit.
So Senator Chris Murphy came to visit you guys?
Yes, he did. So what we had done, let me contextualize this, because this was these were the issues that came up. So for 2 years, upon my arrival at Hillhouse, one of the things I set up was I partnered with our AP Literature
Advanced Placement,
and we did what was called, I set it up initially as a baseline book club. And what we started doing was what she does, Mrs. Yeager, shout out to her.
Shout out to her.
You know, because sometimes as a librarian, it's hard to get people to work with you.
Teamwork's important.
Yep. So what I did was I said, what I would want is you have students that are planning to go to college. And one of the big issues going to college is students aren't aware of a lot of the issues that surround them. And so they come to college, and you meet all these students that they're passionate about the environment. They're passionate about social justice, you know, and all the different facets of social justice, whether it's LGBTQ issues, whether it's you know, civil rights for African Americans, Latinos, whatever the issue, healthcare, all these things. So you're coming in, you're just like, wow, how do you know about all these things? And so I said I wanted to set up what part of her curriculum is students have to look at different types of arguments. So I set up something where I presented different articles on issues.
Excellent. So
and
like
the
a
students,
debate team, if
the
you will.
students debate back and forth
Okay.
online. And so
good.
right, it was awesome because what the students do is you don't just make your point, you have to go to at least 2 other students and either agree or disagree with their point. Like kind of what we're doing.
I like that.
Now,
I like
you
that.
know, so we started right out the gate with I think at the time Jeff Sessions was up for Attorney General. And so the students, the students had to look at Coretta Scott King's letter about him, primary document. You know, there's no bias. I don't, you know, there's no slant. I just present the information and decide from that document whether or not they agreed with Coretta Scott King or not. And we walked through a myriad of issues. We walked through, you know, Meals on Wheels, Planned Parenthood, Sesame.org, you know, programs that are getting their budgets cut. And what we did was we go to the actual website. So we don't go to like an article on Planned Parenthood. We go to Planned Parenthood's site to see what they offer. All right, so let's look at Meals on Wheels and how they work. And then the kids comment on whether or not they feel like it's relevant, whether or not they feel like the budget should be cut.
Good.
Fast forward to gun control.
Okay.
It's an issue that kept coming up.
Yes.
So I think at the time we had the Orlando shooting. Then we had the Las Vegas shooting. And that was with last year's group.
Yes.
So fast forward to this year, and we had the Parkland shooting.
Yes.
And so the students made some, you know, phenomenal comments about how they felt about gun control, because for them, I think the Orlando and the Vegas shooting were different because one took place at a club, one took place at a concert, but this one was really personal to them because it took place at a high school.
A high school, yeah.
Sandy Hook was personal, but what people don't forget is those were such young children that they couldn't come out and advocate and talk about what it was like.
Good point.
So with Parkland, it's interesting because, you know, these kids like, you know, David Hogg, I believe, you know, they're out there and they're visible.
They become public personalities.
Because they're able to articulate, you know, their points, which our students did.
Yes.
So I sent what we were working on to Chris Murphy's office.
Yes.
Because I told the kids, I was like, you're fortunate enough between he and Senator Blumenthal are major gun advocates.
That's true.
For gun control.
Gun control, yes.
So we sent it to his office. His office loved the work that we were doing. And they said, yeah, we love, and we asked them, would you like to come to our school and talk? And so they said, yeah, we'd love to. So we set up a date, March 28th. And so Chris Murphy comes, and it was specific to the students that had worked on this all year long.
Indeed.
It wasn't going to be like this massive assembly where we just have everybody show up. No, these were the kids that had worked on these assignments, that understood these issues. The teachers had worked with them. So Chris Murphy comes, and it's great. It's very personable. You know, the teachers are there. Principal Worthy's there. I'm there.
Shout out to Glenn.
Yep. He's there, and you know, and so we're there, and they asked great questions. One of the first questions one of the students asked was about the stress of being part of the minority party when the majority party, you know,
it's an opposition to a lot of your,
is opposed to what you're proposing. It was a great, like, you know, and they complimented on the great questions and the feedback. We had a student from Syria that got up and spoke about how he had seen all his friends killed, and he talked about, you know, immigration and DACA and what that meant. Good. It was extremely
we are one
powerful.
Community. Yes.
Yeah, it was. But
so I mean, I'm waiting for that. What was it? Where was the negative or the judgmental?
We got lit up. I call it Cerberus.
Lit up
it was
by
the
who?
Three-headed dog. The three-headed dog. So the first head of the dog is conservative trolls.
Okay.
You know they were going to lay into us. Because
online, or they sent you emails?
It was online.
Okay.
Online. Chris Murphy had all the major media outlets. So you know, ABC, CBS, NBC was there. So they go on the website and they're like, oh, the kids are being indoctrinated by this liberal agenda and all this stuff. And meanwhile, you know, Rick Sanatorium.
Yeah, Rick
Sanatorium is like,
from
the kids need to
Pennsylvania.
learn CPR. That was his response. And
yes,
he
And
then he
even
rescinds it.
And he even went on the talk shows saying that personally.
Yeah. So my response was, okay, if you have somebody in your party that is for gun control legislation, let me know.
Yes.
Let me know.
Yes.
They can come and talk.
How do the young people think about that? About that, in fact, they are. I'm hoping they can, at least they might have been somewhat alarmed by the response, but I'm hoping that they saw that they are really if not change agents, that they're making history. That this is a world now where you can make, by your participating in things, you in fact can make history. You're not sure how far the wave might extend, but your actions individually and collectively can influence and be a part of this historical media archival truth versus fake news kind of paradigm. That's what this conflict that's going to be with us for a while.
Yes.
So I'm just curious how they felt about it.
No, I went and I met with them afterwards, and I talked to them about resolve and the fact that, you know, the Freedom Riders were only a couple of years older than you.
Yes.
John Lewis was only a couple of years older than you. You know, the leaders of SNCC, you know, were only a couple of years older than you. You know, I remember as a kid, the shanty towns in the back of Woolsey Hall protesting apartheid. Those were students. And I tell them they were a couple of years, you know, to my seniors, I'm telling them by this year, you're going to be, you know, a freshman in college. So, yeah, I tell them this is your generation, you know, is making a push. And I said, you know, enough is enough. I said the big thing, and Chris Murphy brought this up, is that it's the youth vote. You know, that's the biggest issue. Is you know it's interesting because he talked about 60 and over vote.
That's the emerging majority. In terms of
it's 18 to 30. That's who you have to get the vote. Obama wins because he galvanized the youth. That's what it is. I mean, and even with the rift between Hillary and Bernie Sanders, you know, unfortunately they couldn't repair that fast enough because Bernie galvanized the youth vote.
Absolutely.
That's what you need.
Yep. You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and Kevin Staton is with us. And just as you're talking, that kind of connects also with us. We're talking about textbooks and the political nature. Education, let's admit it, is a political institution. So the trolls were always contending that that liberal education becomes propaganda mechanisms and recruitment mechanisms for that particular constituency, but conservative people do the same thing. So you're involved with it. You're not an elected politician, but you are a politician in so many ways, and I want to kind of compliment you in being, or even an arbitrator, but let's just say an educator. People just don't understand that to be a true educator, that kind of rubric, that name, that label is so key. And you have your opinions, but as you say, just to kind of have the students kind of engage in the dialogue is so key. What's next on your list?
Okay. Can I just touch on what progressives did after the Chris Murphy visit?
Oh, for sure. So
Okay.
You know, it got into the news, and you were just doing your stick and earning your money and being a librarian and a teacher. And so let's hear what some of the progressives.
So the left comes in, or even I call it the pseudo left.
Okay.
Because, you know, there's progressives, there's pseudo progressives, and there are people that they're progressive when it fits their agenda.
Okay, so neoliberals. Sometimes.
So when Chris Murphy comes, Paul Bass comes in and he reports on it, and
Shout
the
out
Independent
to Paul.
did, right, and all they do is they do what all media does. They pick an angle, and they focus on that angle. Well, we had a student there from the ROTC program who wanted to invite Chris Murphy to their ROTC ball. She's the only student that's like dressed in, you know, her military armor ROTC uniform. She's the only student there. But the left is like, oh, you're trying to force those kids into the ROTC and send them off to the military. And once again, it becomes this whole thing of, I call it, it's not the NRA, I call it the NRW. NRW stands for no rationale whatsoever.
No, you're showing your bias now here. You're showing your bias now here.
No,
okay,
because
let me say in defense of free speech and free expression. And I think as we kind of wind down, this is why you got to come back on the show. We are certainly at the stage where people will see their particular cause, and that will color how they see the world.
Right.
That will color how they act and behave. And we have with this mass communication, not even mentioning Marshall McLuhan and others, but we see how what we want to call media, and years ago, for maybe 3,000 years, the Bible was the key source of media.
Right.
You know, people forget about that. So how we view and perceive reality and our ideologies and our perspectives and our beliefs, it's really never, I think, in the history of humankind, has never been so contextual and contentious. So the neoliberals, the so-called progressives, everyone is kind of sharpening their axe, and that's why we have a lot of people talk about the tribal warfare that we are engaged in, not only here in the United States but globally. So for you, the students that you're in contact with, it's such a rich, also treacherous, also tenuous, also delicate environment that they're entering as their mind is processing this information. That is never, the volume and the content and the contradictory nature of the information has never been so profound and accessible. So I really kind of, as we kind of wind down, want to give accolades to you and educators that are committed to being in staying tall and standing tall in the eye of the storm. This is a tsunami, a storm, a hurricane. We see about the macro events in terms of climate change, but it's also happening internally in people's bodies. So I want to kind of congratulate you and salute you for being steadfast. The ROTC is important. I mean, it was contentious even for it to be at Hillhouse. It was there for a little bit. It's not there. So how do we defend our nation? How do we defend our world? Those are the macro issues that our young people have to deal with.
And I get both sides of it.
Sure.
I get the side that says, look, you only see those recruitment stations at schools like New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport. You won't go to Westport or Avon and see, these military recruitment tables. I get that point, but my point was that this whole thing was designed around a teaching unit.
Yes.
And you know what I mean? And you're jumping over.
Yes, and I'm suggesting that because anything now, you can try to create boundaries in terms of how you disseminate things, but media is very porous now.
Right.
So and people will use guerrilla tactics, to use that metaphor as well as that actuality, and marketing guerrilla tactics to kind of get their cause going.
Right.
But as we kind of wind down in terms of the protection of the country, and you referenced when we first started the. Some people say that they called the war, the independence, the war, the 1776 situation. For me, it's just elite mercantiles that want to kind of just preserve their vested interest. But Crispus Attucks. I mean, so we've been involved with this struggle for what is American and what is our role for some time, and not only involved but dying for it.
Right.
Well, what's the next point that we have?
Oh, I definitely want to get to the whole thing about managers versus mechanics.
Okay, let's do that. We have about 3 minutes.
Okay. I'll be quick. One of the things you find, and this is for people that are really committed to social justice, like yourself and others.
Don't judge a book by its cover, Kevin. You want to read it first.
The fact that we're here,
I have a lot of protection. I have a lot of evidence in my defense when I'm hung by my thumbs for freedom and liberation.
But what you have managers and mechanics, and for those of us that are mechanics, we actually want to fix the problems. And so on a large scale, somebody like a Maxine Waters or a John Lewis is a mechanic. If you want to go locally, someone like a Benita Grubbs, Reverend Grubbs is a mechanic. But when you talk about managers, the other side, these are people that they don't want to necessarily fix the problem. They want to manage it.
And why is that important to you? Because people have different personalities, and they'll trend. My experience is people will trend to the skill set, their perception of their most successful skill set, and then the economic issues will kick in as well. But managers might make more money than mechanics.
Oh, they do. And the issue is, it becomes a thing where if you just want it to get fixed, then you're basically, a mechanic lives a life of, I call it a life of service.
Okay.
A manager is more status.
Okay. All right. So some people might want to sacrifice, others might want to just be comfortable.
Right. Well, and that's the whole thing. It's not even so much being comfortable as it is, if it can be fixed, let's just let it get fixed and then move on to the next problem.
So you think there are obstructionists then out there as well?
Oh yeah, I use the analogy. It's like if you and I were at a dam and all the holes in the dam represent all the problems in the black community. You're talking about thousands of holes.
Yes.
And we both got 10 fingers.
Okay.
And so I plug up my little block, and you know, if the manager's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And you're like, "I'm plugging up my part over here. Go plug up your part over there." And we can at least stem a little bit of the tide. But you get into this whole thing of, you know, arguing over whose idea it is.
I see. So the egos.
Who gets paid, all this other stuff.
All the more reason you got to come back.
Yeah, it's
we got like the whole you got it, because I'm trying to keep this show. I want your good side to be on the air. We're Facebook Live, but you're slipping into the real Kevin. It's coming out. It's coming out here. It's coming out. It's coming out. You know, we got now 40 seconds. There was one other point about your shift between being in the classroom to really being the classroom laboratory versus now the librarian laboratory, because they're both experimental situations, although we don't want to perceive them as such.
I can sum it up in this way. Last week we had a group of students that were working on their financial aid forms, and you know, it was really a struggle for them. And as a librarian, instead of a teacher, you can work in concert. You know, we have so many other folks, guidance counselors, social workers, teachers, you know, all these different people that work with the kids. But you can come in and present another avenue and say, hey, we have this book on this kind of research. We have this book on the SAT. This is stuff I couldn't do as a classroom teacher.
See, it's tremendous. Kevin, thank you so much again. You're going to come back, and you're going to come back either this summer or this fall, and you'll bring some students with you.
Definitely.
Students, if you so choose. Also, folks can call in. It's really important to hear your voice, and you know, thank you, Harry, for kind of being managing the desk and the various knobs and dials and labeling the Facebook Live, and thank you to Paul Bass, in spite of what Kevin just said about your article, Paul.
No, it wasn't. I didn't have a problem with it. It was fine. Other people did.
Other people did.
Yeah,
all right.
Progressives attacked him, not me. I'm glad he was there to report it.
And again, this is the Tom Ficklin Show. We'll see you next week. In fact, next week, Kevin, we're going to have a parent and her daughter. You may know her, but her name escapes me. But she's just won she was down at American University and won the student debate, moot court kind of thing. She either came in first place or second place, and so her and her mother's going to be in. Harry, Paul, thanks everybody. Thank you for listening. Kevin, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tom. It was a pleasure.
And you'll come back and sit on the hot seat once again.
No problem.
Take care, everyone.
In my section, ain't willing to give up. Know you getting knocked down, but you gotta get up. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, hey. Cause this is my road. Lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. I'm never gonna give up.